In this video, we're going to look at how to solve an equation of higher degree using factoring. So first, let's make an observation here. Suppose we know that three numbers, either two or three numbers or even more, after we multiply them, we get 0. So the numbers are missing. We don't know what they are, but we do know after we multiply them, we get 0. And so it could be either it could be two numbers or three numbers or four numbers. So it doesn't matter how many numbers we're multiplying. And if we know the answer is 0, and the conclusion is one of the numbers must be 0. Because whenever we multiply non-zero numbers, for example, if we multiply two positive numbers, we're going to always get a positive number, and it's not going to be 0. If we multiply two negative numbers, we also get a positive number. That's not going to be 0. If one of them is positive, the other is negative, we're going to get a negative number. It's not a 0. So in order to get 0, we have to make sure one of the numbers is 0. For example, 3 times 0, we get 0. But if you multiply 3 and 7, you're never going to get a 0. Or even 3 times negative 7, it's going to give you negative 21. It's not going to give you 0. 3 times negative 3 gives you negative 9. Doesn't give you 0. So when we have multiplication, if you want to get 0, you have to make sure one of the numbers is 0. So here we have either two numbers or three numbers or more. And which number is 0? Actually, we have two or three possibilities. So for example, if we only multiply two numbers, it could be the first number is 0. So it's 0 times some kind of number is 0. Or it could be some kind of number times 0 is 0. So which number is 0? Maybe the first number, maybe the second number. So there are two possibilities. Both cases will give us the answer 0. Same thing here. If we multiply three numbers, we get 0. It could be the first number. It could be the second number. It could be the third number. So it could be like something times 0 times something we get 0. Or it could be something times 0, we get 0. So there are going to be three different possibilities. So once we make this observation, we understand why we can use factoring to solve a problem. So first, let's look at the examples. And I do have steps listed here, but let's use examples to help us understand the steps and remember the steps. So when we have an equation, we're going to solve for x. But these equations are different from what we solved before, because we have x squared and x squared. We call these equation of degree 2 or a quadratic equation. And the reason previously when we solve equations, we didn't have a square. So we only have like a x, many x's. We can combine them to get a single x term and to get x by itself. But when we have x squared and x, notice they are not like terms. So we cannot really combine them into a single x term. So that's why the previous method will fail when not work on these questions. Same thing here, n squared and minus 3n. Even if I put them on the same side, we cannot really combine them because they're not like terms. So we need a new method to solve these equations. And again, the goal is still get the unknown by itself, but since we cannot combine them, we're not going to be able to get it by itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to use factoring. And remember the observation we just had. If we have a number times another number equals 0, and then I can say one of the numbers must be 0. So either maybe I call it the first number and the second number. So we can get either the first number is 0 or the second number is 0. So that's what we're going to use. And notice if you look at the format of our equation, well, compared to the equation in the observation, so the right hand side we do have equals 0. So in observation, they have equal 0, we have equal 0. So that does match. But on the other side, we're supposed to have something times. So this is very important. Times, we have to have a multiplication between the two things, two factors. So when we look at the left-hand side, we have a subtraction. We have something minus something equals 0. So it doesn't match the operation we need in order to use this observation. So what we're going to do is we can turn this expression with the minus here into an expression of multiplication, something times something. And the right-hand side, we can keep it. So once we can turn the original equation into this format we need, we can say, well, maybe the first one is 0, maybe the second one is 0. Okay, and then we will be able to get the variable by itself. So, and this process of turning the minus into multiplication is what we just talked about in the previous video, factoring. So far we have only learned one method of factoring, which is GCF. So now these questions, they are applications of factoring, and so the main part, the main job here is to do factoring. Okay, so let's recall how we factor x squared minus 5x. So the right-hand side equals 0. We don't have to do anything. So I just bring them down, the equal sign and the right-hand side. But the left-hand side is something we need to work on. So I'm not going to write down equals 0. I'm just going to focus on the left-hand side. And notice here, we first look for the GCF. And the number in front of x squared is nothing. You can treat it as 1. And 1 and 5, they only have 1 in common. So, but if it's 1, we don't really need to take 1 out, because if you take 1 out, it's not going to change anything. So we're just going to say the GCF is x. And notice the x squared and x, they both have 1 copy in common. So that's the first step, find the GCF. Now, after we found the GCF, we need to determine what's in the parentheses. And notice that in the parentheses, they have a minus, so you can put the minus down. And then you divide whatever given, x squared divided by x, that gives us x. And then we take the second term, 5x divided by x, to get 5. So in order to get x squared, you have to have an x inside the parentheses. After you multiply, then that will give you x squared. In order to get 5x, you have to have actually negative 5x, you have to have a negative 5 in the parentheses, because after you multiply negative 5 with x, that will give you negative 5x. So the factoring is reversing multiplication. So now once we have this, let me put my answer here, copy my answer up there. Okay, now we have the format needed in the observation. Left-hand side, multiplication. So we need the multiplication on one side, and we need a 0 on the other side. We got both now. See, times here, 0 on the right side. So now let's apply the observation. So if we multiply two numbers, x, the two numbers here, we have one of them is x, the other is x minus 5. And if we multiply them, we can get 0. Then one of them must be 0. And again, we have two possibilities. Maybe the first number, x, is 0. Or maybe the second number, x minus 5, is 0. So we set each of them equal to 0. We get two equations. And notice, in both equations, the x squared is gone. We don't have the square anymore. So we can get x by itself. In the first equation, x is already by itself, so I don't have to do any work here. In the second equation, x is not by itself, but I can add 5 to both sides to get x by itself. So we have two answers, two solutions. One of them is 0, the other is 5, and both of them will work. When we solve equation, if you have time, you can also plug those numbers back in there to check your answer. Again, this can be done on your scratch paper. So for example, you could plug 0 into the left-hand side, replace x with 0, and notice 0 minus 0 is still 0. You could plug 5 into the equation, and notice 25 minus 25 is 0. So that tells you both answers are correct. Okay, so let's look at another example. And notice the steps we did here. So we have to make sure we have something, turn the equation into this format. What's this format? One side we have multiplication, the other side we have 0. So now when we look at our equation, neither side is 0. So first let's try to make one side 0, because this is something that can be done easily. So we're gonna let's say turn the right hand side to 0. And we learned this before. If you want to turn one side to 0, that means you want to get rid of this. So we do opposite operation. So we're going to add 3n to both sides. Now they cancel each other, which gives us 0. And the left hand side, n squared and the 3n, one of them has a square, the other doesn't. They're not like terms, so we cannot combine them. Let's just bring down both, n squared plus 3n. So right now, and that's why we have to do step 1, make one side 0, because in the observation, in the format, we need something times something equals 0. So now I got the right hand side down. The right side is 0. I just need to turn the left hand side to multiplication. And right now I have plus. I have a addition, but I can use factoring to turn this to multiplication, something times something. The right hand side, we don't have to touch it, just bring down the 0. The left hand side, in order to turn this to multiplication, I just do factoring, GCF factoring. So notice n squared and n, they both have n in common, so I'm going to take out n. And then I can divide both of them by n. So n squared divided by n gives me n, plus 3n divided by n gives me 3. So that's the factoring I have here. Now and notice now I have what's needed. One side multiplication, the other side is 0. So now I can use the conclusion of the observation. One of them must be 0. So maybe the first number is 0, maybe the second number is 0. And again, the first one is n is already by itself. The second one, we can subtract 3 to get n by itself. So we have two solutions, 0 and -3. Again, if you want to check your answer, you can plug 0 in both sides and -3 in both sides, so you can make sure they are equal to each other. So you make sure you got the correct answer. So to summarize, we have, when we solve equations of degree 2, the quadratic equation, we can follow these steps here. First, make one side 0 if it's not. In the first example we did here, the right hand side is already 0, so you can skip step 1. But step 2, you will not be able to skip that. You have to make sure the other side is factored, which means you have multiplication and multiplication. So that's the main job right here, doing factoring. And after you have the factoring part down, you just set each factor equal to 0, each parenthesis equal to 0, and get the variable by itself. You will get your answers.